Hi, my name is Emma Byrd, and I'm so excited to share with you my findings on my research. And so my research was titled Shameless, Testing the Stranger-Acquaintance Victimization in Sex Trafficking. So the United States definition of sex trafficking is forcing someone to perform commercial sexual act as long as the individual is not above age of consent. Some of the statistics that I found is that 1 to 4 million children are exploited per year. And the biggest problem for sex trafficking is that there's a lot of research done on the victims, but there's not a lot of research done on the perpetrators, which is key to figuring out how to stop sex trafficking. So this research seeks to understand who the perpetrators are and what their relationship is like to the victims. So the purpose of this paper, as I kind of stated, is to document the relationship of perpetrators and its victims and the different levels of victimization for sex victims, and to test acquaintance-stranger victimization theory. And the significance of my paper is that hopefully by understanding the relationships between the victims and the perpetrators, we will be able to better combat trafficking, bring greater awareness to the nature and the extent of victimization, and who the victims are being victimized by, and to also just bring progress in the intervention of sex trafficking. And my hypothesis is that there's a significant relationship between the relationship of the perpetrator and the victim of sex trafficking. There is also a significant relationship of the type of sexual services based on sex and minority and majority status. So some of the statistics that I found for internationally is that women take up 80% of human trafficking. 50% of the women that are trafficked are minors, and 99% of minors that are sex trafficked are females. And also, I found it really interesting that 7 out of 10 victims are exploited in Asia and the Pacific region. And then some of the US statistics are 100,000 to 300,000 children are exploited in the US per year, and 50,000 of those in the US are women and children. And then I also used a couple of theories that kind of try to explain why sex trafficking exists and why the problem is arising. And one of the theories is the connection between prostitution and sex trafficking, which basically just states that they are basically the same thing, and that a lot of times women that are prostituted are being sex trafficked or will eventually be sex trafficked. And then also the theory of immigration and trafficking that states that protecting US borders is actually doing the opposite of helping the issue of sex trafficking, because it's encouraging sex trafficking beyond our territory, because it allows US people to have the mobility, but it doesn't allow those that are in third world countries or outside of the US to come into our country in order to be rescued. But I also have my information on the theory that I used, which is the Stranger-Acquaintance theory. And this basically just talks about how there's a strong emphasis on safety for women in regards to strangers, but a lot of women forget that they can also be trafficked by people around them that are either acquaintances or even intimate partners or friends or family members. And it says women are more likely to experience victimization by acquaintances than by strangers. And so then I have some of the effects of sex trafficking, and as you can see, there are a lot of physical health issues that can occur due to sex trafficking. And there are also a lot of mental health problems that can occur due to sex trafficking as well. And there are also some economic effects due to sex trafficking, which are that it's a $150 billion industry. 99 billion of that is sex trafficking alone. And sex trafficking is a result of supply and demand. And it's also a high reward, low risk, which basically just means that perpetrators can sell and gain a high reward just from one girl, but there's very low risk of them ever being caught. So for my research, I decided to use a database called Counter Trafficking Data Collaborative, which was a global database that had 55,000 victims involved from 43 different nationalities and 52 different countries. This database is not considered random because the industry is hidden, so it's not possible to have to be able to connect to all of the different places that sex trafficking occurs because some of it is hidden due to it being illegal. And then there are some of the contributors below. And for my data analysis, I used chi-square to test the relationship between the nominal variables. And some of my variables, my independent variables, were the relationships, which were the intimate partner, friend, family member, other, and stranger. And then for my dependent, I used the type of exploitation, which was prostitution, pornography, remote interactive sexual service, private sexual service, and concentrated. And my control variables were the sex of the victims and the majority and minority status of the victims. And for my frequencies, you can see that the majority of the relationships between these victims and perpetrators were unknown, but there also was quite a high rate of the different relationships. You had about 1,500 per relationship, and then you also had, as you can see here, most of the people that were involved in sex trafficking were trafficked by prostitution. Majority were female. And the ones that were males were actually labor trafficked, not sex trafficked. And then the majority of those trafficked were adults, but you also have 19% that were minors. So for my first chi-square analysis, I analyzed the relationship of perpetrator by the type of sex trafficking activities. And as you can see, prostitution was very significant. In the relationships, all of the relationships between the victim and the perpetrator were extremely significant. And then for private sexual services, the relationships of the intimate partner and the unknown or stranger were extremely significant. And here I have my chi-square analysis of perpetrator by the type of sex trafficking activities by female. And here, once again, you see that prostitution is extremely significant for the intimate partner, friend, and the unknown and stranger. And then you also have, once again, the private sexual services, the intimate partner and unknown relationship was extremely significant. So for my next one, I had the chi-square analysis of relationship of perpetrators by the type of sex trafficking activities by male. There wasn't as much information on the males because, as I said, most of them were labor trafficked, but of those that were sex trafficked, the relationship of other or stranger were extremely significant when it came to prostitution. So for my next one, I had the chi-square analysis of relationship of perpetrators by the type of sex trafficking by the adult status. And once again, prostitution remains the most significant for the intimate partner, friend, family, or unknown or stranger to traffic their victims. And with private sexual services, it was intimate partner and unknown that were significant. And then for my last table, I had the chi-square analysis of relationship of perpetrators by the type of sex trafficking activities by the minority status. And it was most likely for all of the different types of relationships to prostitute their relationship or their victims. But it was also significant for a friend to traffic through private sexual services as well. And so here was my discussion, which is kind of what I just went over, um, with what was more likely for the relationships, which turned out to be it was more likely for the prostitution, for all of the relationships to prostitute their victims. And so here are my references. Thank you so much for listening.